I'd just like to ask everyone to give a great Kiwanis welcome to Jessy Shouler from Adult, Child, and Family Services.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. That's a very interesting, the kind of whole concept of dreams being more vivid and that kind of thing. And I think it's a very real thing that a lot of people are experiencing things in a little bit with a little bit more intensity than maybe we were used to. You know, we have to make sure that we're allowing ourselves grace to know that feeling this a little bit increased stress related to the pandemic is very, very normal. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit today about the difference between stress and anxiety. As Mike said, there is definitely a huge brain component, and our brains really are wired very complexly and yet very primitively. We all have that really strong fight, flight, freeze kind of thing related to very normal stress. And that's what makes us motivated. That's what makes us smart in keeping ourselves safe. But when stress, like we're experiencing now with the pandemic, when it lasts with such an intensity and an uncertainty for an extended period of time, it can be really hard on our systems. And so from my perspective, as a mental health provider, I own Adult, Child, and Family Services here in Mankato. We have a satellite office in the city of Blue Earth as well. And we see a lot of clients who are coming through with an increased level of both physical symptoms and mental health symptoms. So stress in general is kind of that like gut feeling that we get when something's uncertain or we feel like something that means something to us is at stake. So that's your racing heart, it's your sweaty palms, it's the butterflies in your tummy, the very normal thing that all of us feel. But after a while, it becomes where your body almost is trained to be at a more hypervigilant level. And that's what a lot of people are experiencing now with the pandemic. First responders, anybody who is really in the community providing first line ER docs, those types of folks, and mental health professionals. It's very interesting, and you can really tell how people's physical symptoms as well as mental health symptoms are kind of exacerbated and kind of at a higher level. What symptoms we might see with folks after a while of being at that increased level of stress resembles a little bit more of what in the mental health field we describe as a panic attack. So it's that tightness of chest, it's the muscle tension, it's feeling headache, sleeping difficulties, restlessness, even digestive issues. And a lot of people, Mike mentioned sleeping stuff, a lot of people are seeing sleeping difficulties, or they're eating less or more, or they're sleeping less or more. Anything that's kind of outside of a person's norm, we're seeing that quite a bit. A big piece of that, and this is why you guys as a group are such a wonderful resource to our community, a big piece of that is social connection. And so many of us have been feeling since March, there's been not just the uncertainty, but also the disconnectedness that a lot of people feel, and they feel real isolated and alone. So if someone has kind of a predisposition to anxiety and a difficulty dealing with anxiety, that social disconnection, again, just really can really increase someone's symptoms. Now, our dealing with stress is a little bit different than what, when someone says, oh, I have a diagnosis of anxiety, I have a mental health diagnosis. That's where your unhealthy thinking patterns and kind of a fixation or negative thought process become a point where the person has a lot of difficulty managing. It's almost becomes invasive, and for some people, illogical. We have all of our world events going on right now, and in the pandemic and community things like with the George Floyd situation, now we're having all these, we're figuring out what we're gonna do with kids. People, when they get at a certain level of stress and a certain level of anxiety, can start getting bitey at each other. And that's sometimes how we try to figure out what the heck it is that we're going to do with this increased anxiety we're feeling. And that's some of that negative thought process, or not letting the logical part of our brain mix with the emotional part of our brain. And sometimes anxiety is related to a specific kind of trigger, and sometimes it's not. I'm sure we all know somebody who just is a very anxious person. Doesn't need to have to be a trigger. It's just that they're a more, they tend to be a more escalated, worrisome person. Those are the people that during this pandemic tend to struggle a little bit more, because they already have difficulty, and then add on another level of pretty uncertain stress, and that can make it very, very difficult for people. 5 things that we kind of look for when someone, and we've been looking for when people are coming into the office, that tell me that it went from just a normal level of stress to something that might be a little bit more concerning, is if a person is coming in and they're looking for things to fear. We call it threat scanning. They're just scanning, they're constantly looking for something that feels scary, and even maybe assigning danger to things that actually aren't necessarily harmful. And so they're just kind of, again, being at that hypervigilant place where everything feels a little bit scary. Thought process where we call it catastrophizing. So really going from, here's the scenario is kind of yucky, but I'm going to take it all the way up here and make, and it really kind of take it to heart, sometimes personalize, sometimes make kind of, people can kind of make actions or say or do things that are maybe a little bit out of characteristic of themselves when they're kind of catastrophizing and in that brain space. A worry that went from kind of normal worry to really, really big worry, we call it hypothetical worry, where all the what ifs, all the possible things that could be bad, that person's going to worry about it. And they're going to think about it and think about it and think about it. And again, it becomes kind of invasive. One of the big things that I personally have to check for myself, this is where my anxiety comes out, is letting my emotion drive my bus. Emotional reasoning. So things that normal emotion comes out, but then we, instead of letting our brain kind of take a logical piece to our emotion, we see that emotion as just the reality of things, which isn't always logical. and sometimes we have to really work hard to kind of ground our anxieties or ground our stressors enough to really think through, to make the best choices for ourselves and the ones that we love. And the other thing that we look for is when someone's kind of really big worries, where they're kind of making predictions about things that they're making factual predictions about things that probably they're not really thinking logically through things. So you guys as a group, being service providers for the community, also have each other to be able to kind of I really encourage you to bounce things off of each other. And sometimes the best thing that we can do when we're feeling these extra layers of anxiety is to go to those people we love and care about. Some people find faith as a really very grounding, powerful source, but making sure that we're reflecting on ourselves and our own experiences around stress and anxiety, as well as checking in with people we trust and say, hey, this is my thoughts on this. Am I way off base? Or am I kind of in the right ballpark? Because as human beings, we are emotionally wired. And so we need each other sometimes to kind of keep us centered. Things that I would really encourage people to think about, besides reaching out to other folks and finding things finding helpful coping for themselves, like faith, like family, like involving yourself in the community and allowing yourself opportunities for purpose. Those are awesome, awesome things. Other things to think about. What is your information diet? What are you filling your brain with? How much time and energy are you spending on filling your brain with information when it might, reaches a certain level where it's not productive anymore. So what news sources are you going to? Are they positive, very factual news sources, or are they really emotionally driven? If you're spending a lot of time on technology or with other folks who are really emotionally driven, it's harder to figure out how to navigate where that information should land in your brain. And then are you balancing that information with uplifting positive things like this, like interactions with other people and with reading a really great uplifting book or listening to some beautiful uplifting music, making sure that you're filling your brain with information that is could be provoking of stress, but also that you're also allowing as much time and space for those intentional information that's going to be soothing and fulfilling to your heart and to your soul. Thinking about another thing that I encourage for my staff and my clients very often is, what's my sphere of influence? What do I got control over? For people who have ever been in any kind of like Alcohol Anonymous or 12-step programs, they talk about surrendering to what it is that you can't control, that serenity prayer. And there's definitely merit to that. Making sure that we're trying our best to redirect our attention to things we can control, and thinking about things and leaving things, trying our best to leave things be when they're out of our control. And right now, goodness gracious, the sphere of things that are in our control feels much smaller than the things that feel like are very big and out of our control. So just really trying to redirect to things that you can control. And your friends, your family, resilience really comes from taking little bites off of things we can control in our life and treading forward with that and growing and challenging ourselves in positive ways. Those are all wonderful things to put the energy of control into. One of the things that I think is a muscle that a lot of us, all of us, kids, adults, everybody have really had to flex lately, is tolerating uncertainty. And that can be so challenging, so very, very challenging. So really trying to, again, pay attention to what your thoughts are, paying attention to what your feelings are and what your gut tells you and what thoughts are connected to those feelings, and trying to make sure that you're kind of shifting your mindset to healthier thoughts that might be more productive for you. Again, sometimes we need help from other people to help us do that. I know sometimes my brain gets on a runaway train and I have to have, a trusted colleague or my husband, or sometimes even my teenage kids are like, "Mom, what are you thinking?" and so we can kind of help each other. And I'm like, "Oh, you're right. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to say a prayer. I'm going to remember what it is that I'm grateful for and kind of reground myself." So just really working on tolerating those things that are uncertain and, again, not in our control. My daughter, which I swear we think we're teaching our kids about life and they tell us what life is all about. One of my daughters made a scrapbook, like just a couple-page scrapbook, and I thought this was a great idea from a mental health perspective, of all of her favorite quotes. And these quotes are things about strength. They're things about kind of giving things up to God. They're quotes about relying on trusted friends and family. She calls it her wise book, and it's just wisdom quotes around strength and having things that happen to us in our lives. So much of what we do with it, our attitude towards things, are what is going to fill our heart or take away from what our heart feels. So I just thought that scrapbook was a great idea. Another thing to think about is thought challenging. In the moment and in the mental health field, a modality that people use is cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that's kind of thinking, what's that thought that came through my head? And sometimes the thoughts come out, even like Mike said, through dreams, through the moments when you're really escalated and all of a sudden a thought comes in your head and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Really tagging those things, kind of paying attention to them, maybe even doing a journal and writing some things down, and thinking about what you would prefer to think. So for example, just in a very simplest form with COVID, feeling like I can't go anywhere, I'm going to get sick. I can't go anywhere because I will be exposed. Trying to kind of shift that thought process to, I am doing everything I can do to be safe for my friends and family. So essentially, the thought process went from, I mean, it's the same type of meat, but it's shifting from this fear response to, I'm taking control of what I can control, and I'm going to make the very, very best of this. Does that kind of make sense how that is a little bit different? And then my last little suggestion to really think about in terms of coping with really uncertain times like we have now is, don't forget to add to your day, every single day, the things that give your life meaning and purpose. Activity, like every single day, doing some kind of moving, whether that's mopping your floor, being in your garden, going for a walk, but just really throwing the ball for your dog, really doing something that's going to keep you moving. Social interaction for those people that you love and trust. That's a very, very, very big piece. Even if it's over technology, making sure that you are staying connected to other people. And then every day, maybe picking something, one little thing for, whether it's prayer, whether it's playing the piano. I love playing the piano, and I love my flowers. So every day, I even for a little bit, if I'm just pulling weeds or I'm sitting down at the piano for 5 minutes, it's something that fills my heart up, that keeps me feeling resilient to move through the next day. So really being sure that you're allowing each of yourselves time and space during your day to pick one of those, something that really fills you up. And hopefully when you're able to take the time to do those things, if it does get to a point, and I'm not plugging my agency, Adult Child and Family Services particularly, but please also know that it's not, don't feel ashamed if you do need to reach out and just get a little bit of extra help past your friends and family. When people find themselves in a place where anxiety is kind of driving their bus, there's no shame in reaching out to a mental health professional and saying, hey, I just need a little bit of help to kind of work through this current part of my life, this season that we're all kind of going through. So when it starts becoming invasive and the things in your life that normally would really bring you purpose and meaning aren't anymore, that's really when you know that you want to think about possibly reaching out to something maybe just a little bit beyond your friends and family. Even talking to your medical doctor sometimes can be a start. So just kind of paying attention to your thoughts, paying attention to what your heart tells you, checking in with your friends and family to as often as you can. Those are some of the things that we've found at the clinic here to be helpful for people. So I was hoping, and I have an anxiety workbook that I can forward out to Mike that has some of these things that I've just kind of shared in a little bit expanded if anybody's wants some bedtime reading. I can definitely send that out to Mike, and you guys can use or not or whatever, but I'll never bad to have all the resources available to you. That's possible. But I was hoping to be able to just kind of open it up to you guys, and if anybody of the group has specific questions or wanted to share their experience of what they've kind of gone through with the pandemic and the recent world events, I thought maybe this would be a great time to kind of find social connection in this way. So
who's got a question for Jess or a comment or whatever?
Jess, this is Liz Paul. Very much appreciate all you had to say today, and thank you for it. I had one comment and one question. My son, I know, suffers from both depression and anxiety. And one of the things we've noticed in the pandemic is some increased almost agoraphobia from him in wanting to not leave the house because of the pandemic, and trying to find ways to manage that. And one thing I would add for people working with kids and anxiety is it often comes out as anger and things that don't necessarily seem like anxiety to parents or caregivers at first. So you have to sometimes dig a little deeper to see what's going on for kids in mental health crisis. So if your kids are really angry all of a sudden and something is different, it could be anxiety and not just anger. But that leads me into my question is, what would you say someone should do if they find themselves in a crisis situation right now during this time of COVID, and what would you recommend are ways to reach out and places to call or go, or how to seek help when folks find themselves in that spot?
First of all, air high five on being an awesome mom and being so mindful about what your kiddo your son is going through. You are 150% right that we're seeing for a lot of people. He's in a very big boat with a lot of people where folks who have had increased depression and anxiety is looking like a real hesitation to go out into the community. Absolutely. Because kind of what I was talking about before with some of those negative thoughts, to someone who has anxiety, not just dealing with stress, but like what you're describing, just they deal with depression and anxiety. Those thoughts are so invasive, it does truly in their body physically feels like if they walk out that door, they are going to be in harm's way. And we as human beings are wired, obviously, to not put ourselves in harm's way. So he is responding from that perspective, makes total sense when you break down why he might be doing that. And I just I really appreciate what you're talking about and trying to offer him a feeling of safety so that he can go out and socialize or get out of the house, those kinds of things. Crisis is a really, it's an interesting concept because what I would see as crisis in the terms of mental health, we might define crisis as someone is going to be harmful to themselves or someone else. That's a high level of anxiety. We're talking, 911 needs to be called, or the person needs to go to the emergency department. Then there's kind of like a little bit of a continuum. A crisis also could include like, my son won't leave the house, has not left the house, and has not spoken to anybody for a week. What do I do with that? Because that can be an internal crisis for somebody, And in those cases, I really would encourage you to reach out to a mental health professional. It might not be something that it might be where it's a fairly short-lived treatment plan. Just really dealing with the very kind of acute issues around that anxiety and depression that person is experiencing. Or it might end up being something that's a little bit longer term where you're dealing with not just the very in their face current increase in anxiety and depression, but also hitting some of the underlying issues that are more chronic for that person. So there are, in the Mankato area, there are many very wonderful mental health agencies. A little bit of a pickle. A lot of mental health agencies are still doing a lot of services via Zoom and telehealth like this, which for kiddos is really challenging. But for kiddos or adults who are having some of that high anxiety and almost like agoraphobic, I can't leave the house kind of feelings, telehealth has been really helpful. My clinic here, we are doing a combination of people are welcome to come into the clinic if they feel safe doing so. And we also offer telehealth if that's what's more comfortable. So I really would, you could even call into most clinics and say, hey, this is this scenario. I feel like it's a crisis. Would you recommend me making an appointment? And that person can kind of help you triage things that are going on with you. Let's see, I had a little message over here. What is the best way to talk or help someone during an episode of anxiety? Our first response when we love somebody and care about somebody is going to be to fix it. You want to tell them to take a deep breath. You want to tell them that their thoughts are irrational. You want to tell them to do something. My biggest piece of advice would to be just maybe a hand on their shoulder. You could breathe with them. We're going to just take some deep breaths. I'm right here. And I just want to listen. We have 2 ears, folks, and 1 mouth, but we seem to want to use that mouth way more than we use our ears. So really being a good listener when someone is having an episode of anxiety, letting them talk it all out. And then you could decide with that person if they need something in addition, if they need to go see their medical provider, if they need to go see a mental health professional. You could talk through them in a problem-solving kind of way, but I really encourage you when you're with somebody who has that really increased fight, flight, freeze response, and they're at a very high anxiety place, to stay calm and to listen from your heart and let them kind of get out what they need to get out. At that point, it's not about fixing anything. It's just about being with them in whatever their journey in that moment kind of is. So,
Can I ask a question? We have time for one more question. Does somebody have one more question?
Is senility and Alzheimer's a lack of positive thinking? And is there anything you can do for it?
Orion, you cut out there. You're cutting out, Orion. Orion, can you try that question again? Maybe get a little closer to your mic.
Is senility and Alzheimer's a lack of positive thinking, or is this when your brain just goes wacko? And can you do anything for it?
You're just did you get that, Jess?
I think I got a little bit of it. I thought I heard him ask if kind of dementia and Alzheimer type of symptomology is related to a lack of oxygen. Orion, is that what you asked?
Right.
I am the furthest from a medical doctor. In my experience, there is dementia and Alzheimer's is such a complicated thing of not just brain organics and organization, but it's the physical symptom as a whole. There's a lot of things I think that go into how dementia and Alzheimer's develops. I wish I could answer that question better, but I don't feel a little bit out of my scope of practice. But if you do have questions on dementia and Alzheimer's, I really would encourage you to talk to your medical doctors. They're usually very good resources for that type of thing.
Jess, thank you for joining us today. Mike, thanks for the timely speaker and everything. Let's hear it for Jess. All right.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you.
You bet. I want to thank our guests for showing up today. Sarah, thanks for being here. Wilbur, thanks for being here as a guest. Amy, thanks for bringing her. We appreciate that. We want to say happy birthday to Dwayne and Fred, and welcome Corey from the Salvation Army to our meeting. Mike, our speaker next week looks really interesting. Do you want to take just 30 seconds and tell us about that?
Sure, it's going to be Todd Fingston. Todd is the director of campus rec up at Minnesota State University, and he's going to talk about the Maverick Dome and how that has been used. Perhaps it's been used even in a bigger way with all of the situations that have happened, but there'll likely be less athletic team in use of that dome, since they're not going to be playing a whole lot of games this fall. But Todd's going to talk about that, and he'll have a PowerPoint, I believe, and John, he'll also have links to the MSU website that he'll share with us too. So Todd's a great guy. Like Jess, he's very enthusiastic, and I think he'll really bring the subject to life.
Hey, and that place is big enough. If we wanted to get back together for meetings, we could socially distance there, right?
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. Well, with that, Orion, you ready to lead us in When Kiwanis Calls? All right. Go ahead.
When Kiwanis call, let everyone stand up. When Kiwanis calls, when Kiwanis call, let each one raise his cup. As we gather round the table, as long as we are able, we'll pledge to thee our loyalty. When Kiwanis calls. Bye, everybody.
John, you're muted.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We'll see you talk about the MSU Dome next week. Have a good week.